If you think you've seen darkness, you haven't seen this. Hit that subscribe button, because after this story, you'll never see peace and love the same way again. August 9th, 1969. Los Angeles, where dreams were supposed to live forever. The sun had gone down over Benedict Canyon, and the city slept beneath the hum of crickets and faraway sirens. But inside a quiet mansion on Cielo Drive, the night was about to change history. At 10:50 Cielo Drive, actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, was enjoying a quiet evening with a few close friends. The house was alive with music, laughter, the flicker of candles, and the faint scent of wine and cigarettes. No one knew that miles away, a group of strangers was getting into an old Ford outside a rundown ranch on the edge of Death Valley. 4 of them, young, dazed, and eerily calm. Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. They weren't going out to party. They were going out because Charlie told them to. Charles Manson, the drifter, the ex-con, the man who preached that the world was ending. He told them they were family. He told them society was rotten, that they were the chosen ones. He spoke of an apocalypse he called helter-skelter, and they believed every word. The Ford wound through the canyons under the silver moonlight. No one spoke much. The only sound was the rattle of the engine and the whisper of Manson's orders echoing in their minds. When they reached the gate of the Cielo Drive property, Tex stepped out. He cut the phone line. Inside the house, the music kept playing. Around midnight, the silence shattered. A scream. Then more, desperate, terrified. Neighbors later told police they heard something strange, a sound that didn't belong in those quiet hills. But no one called. Not yet. By dawn, the house was still. The driveway stained with signs of struggle. 5 people were gone, including Sharon Tate and her unborn child. Detectives from LAPD's Homicide Division arrived that morning stunned. They'd seen crime before, but not like this. Not in Hollywood. Not here. Inside, chaos. Furniture overturned. Messages scrawled on the walls in what looked like red paint. A chilling word, pig. One officer stepped outside to breathe. He'd only been on the job 2 years. He vomited behind his cruiser before returning inside. It wasn't just the brutality, it was the precision. Someone had planned this. Reporters swarmed the gate by afternoon. News helicopters circled above. Hollywood stars locked their doors. Agents whispered that anyone could be next. As the day dragged on, investigators pieced together fragments. Footprints near the bushes. A discarded gun. And something else, a pair of glasses left on the floor, near the couch where Sharon Tate had been sitting only hours before. But nothing made sense. There was no motive. Who could want to destroy an innocent woman like her, or her friends? Back at LAPD headquarters, Lieutenant Robert Helder spread crime scene photos across the table. They were trying to find a pattern, a clue, anything. But as the hours turned into days, the case felt like chasing smoke. Meanwhile, across the desert, at Spawn Ranch, the family was celebrating. Not with music. Not with laughter. But with silence, a heavy, eerie silence. Charles Manson sat in the dirt outside an old movie barn, strumming a guitar. Around him, his followers swayed, eyes empty, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he said one thing. It started. That same night, he sent more of them out. Different house. Different victims. No one knew that another tragedy was about to unfold, one that would confirm that Los Angeles was under siege from something far darker than anyone imagined. As police scrambled, they found no connection between the murders, just fragments of horror spread across the city. But deep inside Spawn Ranch, the family already knew what they'd done. They believed it was righteous, that they were carrying out a message. And when detectives followed the faint trail back to that isolated ranch, what they found made even hardened investigators question everything they knew about evil. Because in that dry, sunburned desert, among horses, broken film sets, and dusty shacks, lived a man who never killed with his hands, but whose words were deadlier than any weapon. And his name was Charles Manson. But when detectives finally confronted the people who called him father, they discovered something far worse than murder. They found blind devotion. And one of them was ready to confess. Los Angeles, August 1969. The city was gripped by fear. The words Tate murders filled every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every late-night whisper in Hollywood cafes. No one felt safe anymore. But while the media circled the glamorous tragedy on Cielo Drive, another nightmare unfolded just a day later, the LaBianca murders. Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a quiet, respectable couple living in Los Feliz, were found dead in their own home. Same brutality. Same eerie message. Words written on the walls in the same chilling red. Detectives stared at each other in disbelief. This wasn't random. This was a pattern, a signature. The city's richest neighborhoods had turned into hunting grounds. No one knew who was next. Detective Helder sat in his car outside the LaBianca home, the night air thick with cigarette smoke and exhaustion. Same handwriting, he muttered, holding up the crime scene photos under the dome light. Same madness. His partner leaned back, shaking his head. You think it's one guy? Helder didn't answer. Something told him it wasn't just one person, it was a group. A cult. Meanwhile, at Spawn Ranch, the so-called family had grown. Nearly 30 followers lived among the wreckage of an old Western film set, sleeping in stables, eating from trash bins, listening to their leader speak in riddles about music, death, and revolution. Charles Manson sat cross-legged on the ground, shirtless, eyes burning with conviction. He spoke of Helter Skelter, a prophecy he claimed was hidden inside Beatles' lyrics. He said a race war was coming, that they were the chosen survivors. To the outside world, he was a failed musician, a drifter. But to the young men and women sitting around him, he was the truth incarnate. He had broken them down, one by one, with charm, LSD, and manipulation. They gave him everything, their money, their loyalty, their souls. When he said to kill, they didn't question him. They only asked, who? Weeks after the murders, police still had no solid leads. Hundreds of tips came in daily, none of them useful. Until a small crime 300 miles away cracked the case open. A group of Manson's followers had been arrested for auto theft in the desert. Among them, Susan Atkins, a young woman with wild eyes, a haunting smile, and a secret burning inside her. At first, she bragged to her cellmates about something big, about making the news. The other women thought she was bluffing. But one night, she whispered something chilling through the bars. They did everything Charlie said, even the pregnant one. Word spread fast. Within days, detectives were on a plane to question her. And when they walked into that small jailhouse interview room, Susan Atkins told them a story that would make even seasoned officers go pale. She spoke in a calm, almost dreamy tone, describing a night under Manson's orders. She said they went to a house on a hill. That Charlie picked the target. That they were supposed to start Helter Skelter. Helder listened in silence as she spoke, his pen frozen over the notepad. When she finally stopped, the room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. He leaned forward. You're saying Manson told you to do this? She smiled faintly. He didn't have to. We just knew. The next morning, LAPD descended on Spawn Ranch. Helicopters circled overhead as officers swarmed the property. Manson stood at the doorway of a weathered shack, unbothered, barefoot in the dust. When they cuffed him, he grinned. You think you're stopping something, he said softly. This is just the beginning. Dozens of his followers were rounded up that day, dazed, loyal, and eerily calm. They sang as they were taken away. Not screams. Not protests. They sang hymns Manson had taught them about the end of the world. Back at LAPD headquarters, the evidence started to fall into place. Fingerprints matched. Footprints. Even the handwriting from the walls. But the real puzzle was the why. How could one man convince so many people, especially young, educated women, to kill total strangers? Psychologists called it mass delusion. Prosecutors called it murder by proxy. But Helder knew what it really was: control. Pure, chilling control. The media called Manson a madman. But to his family, he was a prophet. As the investigation deepened, detectives found photos, journals, and even a list of other possible targets. Names of celebrities, politicians, anyone Manson believed symbolized the corrupt system. And while the city breathed a small sigh of relief that the killers were caught, one question remained. Would Manson himself ever pay for what he ordered? Because when prosecutors tried to tie him to the crimes, Manson's defense was chillingly simple. I never killed anyone. And technically, he was right. But as investigators soon discovered, it wasn't his hands that killed. It was his words. And they were about to become the deadliest evidence ever heard in a courtroom. The courthouse in Los Angeles buzzed with tension. Reporters flooded the steps, their cameras flashing as the accused were led in. Charles Manson, small but electric, his stare slicing through the noise like a blade. He smirked, as though the world was a stage and he, the director of its chaos. Behind him, his followers, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, moved in eerie unison, their expressions detached, almost reverent. Inside, the air was thick. The crowd quieted as the prosecution began laying out the crimes that had horrified America. But this wasn't just about murder, it was about control, manipulation, and how one man had turned peace-loving youth into instruments of destruction. The jury listened to the testimonies, each one painting a clearer picture of the hold Manson had over his so-called family. Witnesses described the atmosphere at Spahn Ranch, how Manson preached about an impending race war he called Helter Skelter, borrowed from the Beatles song he claimed carried secret messages to him. To his followers, he wasn't a criminal, he was a prophet. In court, Manson thrived on the attention. He carved an X into his forehead, claiming he had removed himself from the system. Days later, his followers mirrored him, each one carving the same symbol into their skin, proof of how far his influence reached. The courtroom became a theater of madness, with reporters scrambling to make sense of the spectacle. When the prosecution presented Susan Atkins' confession, the silence in the room was deafening. She described how Manson orchestrated everything, how he chose the targets, how he stayed back, watching, directing, ensuring his commands were followed. The words chilled everyone who heard them. But Manson didn't flinch. He leaned back, smiling as if enjoying the attention. At one point, he turned toward the prosecutor and whispered, "You're the one on trial, not me." The arrogance, the eerie calm, it was as if he believed he'd already won. As weeks turned into months, the trial became a cultural phenomenon. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered, some demanding justice, others bizarrely proclaiming Manson's innocence. Television networks ran daily updates, and the faces of the accused became symbols of a generation's lost innocence. One of the prosecutors, Vincent Bugliosi, later recalled the surreal nature of it all. It wasn't just about what they did, he said, but how they made people question what humanity was capable of. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom felt frozen in time. Guilty on all counts. The words echoed across the room. Gasps filled the air, and Manson's followers began chanting, a low rhythmic hum that unsettled everyone present. Manson himself simply smiled, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if already planning what would come next. The judge sentenced Manson and his followers to death, though the sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment when California abolished the death penalty. Yet, in many ways, the punishment didn't feel like enough. The world had seen what manipulation, isolation, and unchecked charisma could create. As Manson was led away, he looked back at the reporters and muttered, "This is your world, not mine." It was both a warning and a farewell, an echo of the chaos he had sown. Years later, interviews from former family members revealed the depth of Manson's psychological control. Many spoke of how he stripped away their identities, convincing them they were part of something divine. They described life at the ranch: no sleep, no real food, constant preaching, and the belief that Manson's word was law. Even behind bars, his influence lingered. Letters poured in from strangers, fascinated by his twisted charisma. Some saw him as a monster, others as a symbol of rebellion. But those who survived his reign of manipulation knew better. They saw a man who preyed on the weak, twisted love into loyalty, and destroyed lives for a delusion. As time passed, the world moved on, but the shadow of the Manson family never fully disappeared. The case changed how America viewed cults, crime, and the fragility of free will. It forced society to confront a chilling truth, that evil doesn't always arrive with a gun or a mask. Sometimes, it arrives with a smile and a promise of belonging. Charles Manson died in 2017, still behind bars, still unrepentant. But his legacy endures in documentaries, films, and whispered conversations about the darkness of the human mind. He had wanted to be remembered, and in the worst way possible, he was. As one journalist wrote, Manson's true weapon wasn't violence. It was persuasion. The camera pans over an aging photograph of Manson's stare, cold, knowing, eternal. The voice of history seems to whisper, evil doesn't vanish. It evolves, hides, and waits for new ears willing to listen. So if you think this story was dark, you're not ready for what's coming next. Hit subscribe, because the next case may be even more twisted than this one.